meeting you right where you are on your foster care journey. This is the Forgotten Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Forgotten Podcast. I'm your host, Jamie Cabe, and I am so happy to be with you. If you are part of the foster care community, passionate about serving, or simply interested in learning more, we are here for you. In every episode of this podcast, you will hear stories from men and women who have experienced foster care to one degree or another. They may have grown up in the system, are caseworkers, foster parents, or others who are here to bring you hope or encouragement. If you enjoy this podcast, please subscribe and share it with a friend. And remember, you are not alone. I hope you enjoy the Forgotten Podcast. Today, I am joined by Kara Higgins. Kara is a mother to 6 children. And as we talked about how her kids came to her family, it's been through the old-fashioned way. It's been through foster care. It's been through adoption and legal guardianship. So your kids have come to you through a variety of ways. Kara and her husband, Ryan, founded Amana Kids, which is an orphan care ministry, which is an educational sponsorship program in Rwanda with a focus on trauma-informed interventions, learning, and care. Kara has also been trained and certified in Cultivating Connection, which is a parent-to-parent program under the umbrella of Empowered to Connect. And she facilitates classes as well as one-on-one coaching for foster and adoptive families, social workers, counselors, and medical students on applying trauma-informed care, which is based on TBRI, trust-based relational intervention. We've talked about this on the program before. But we're really going to explore this idea of connection today. So, Kara, thank you so much for being on the show today. And I'm excited to get started with the story of adopting your boys, because you learned a lot about trauma, about love and connection from this experience. So kind of wherever you want to start, tell us about your adoption story.
Okay. It had always been our plan, even when we were dating, that someday we wanted to grow our family through adoption. And I think that was probably something that had to do with, pretty early in my life, my parents were really awesome about exposing me to other walks of life and helping me to realize how what a blessed family and a blessed life I grew up in. And so that had always been on our radar. And then I had 2 really high risk pregnancies, and both my biological kids had medical trauma, NICU time, were just sick, fragile little babies. And so it was really a natural step for us to start exploring adoption. And we landed on international adoption. And, now that this many years later, I have I look at international adoption a whole lot differently than I did then. Now that I help run a nonprofit in a developing country, I have a lot more reservations about that, but this is the story God wrote for us. And I can't imagine not having my boys, my Rwandan boys. They're my sons. And so we, in 2009, Rwanda opened up briefly. There was a small window of time where they had international adoption open, and they were piloting a program. And we had recently, I think we had watched Hotel Rwanda. I had read some books while I was in grad school on holiday. Like on a holiday, I read some books about Rwanda. And then we just got something in the mail that said that they were piloting a program. And we thought, well, that's appealing to us. So we prayed about it. And then we were anticipating it would be like an 18 to 24 month process. Well, it was like 9 months start to finish. Wow. So our heads were kind of spinning even as we went to get our boys and meet our boys. And my husband's in education. He's a teacher in public schools. And I, at that time, was a pediatric nurse at a really large pediatric hospital working with kids with cancer and blood diseases and bone marrow transplants and even hospice. So I thought we both were pretty naive. We thought we knew kids. We thought we knew trauma. I don't feel like in 2009, people were talking about trauma or talking about how hard adoption is, or even, we didn't even have the language on our radar of how it's such a juxtaposition, right? It's a huge loss. It's joyful, but it's also sorrowful. Like, we didn't even have that mindset that it can be two things at once. And so those first years bringing our boys home were super hard. We were in a dark valley. We didn't actually have the ages of our sons. We had very little information other than we knew they'd been in an institutional setting, and that's never a good place for kids. Right. And just the complexities of bringing an African child into a white family, in a language they don't speak, all the trauma of the whole process too, and and for them, it was traumatic to be in our home for a long time. And so those first years were really hard, as parents know, and it felt like we didn't know what we were doing at all. And so we started really taking a deep dive in. I started making an intention of talking about it and sharing it, because I really felt like being authentic. I wish someone would have told me this. I wish someone would have told me that bringing a kid into a home isn't going to instantly fix everything. And I wish I would have had support systems, and I didn't. And so we just started talking about it. I started blogging about it, and just walking through that, trying to find therapists, because it's hard to find a therapist that understands trauma in kids, especially if you want a Christian one, especially if you want a faith-based therapist. And I really believe a lot of churches mean well, but even churches and pastors are not trained to support families who are adopting or fostering, or families who've had a child with an adverse childhood event or any kind of a traumatic event. Sure. And so we didn't have anything. We were just kind of fumbling through the dark, taking it day by day and barely hanging on.
And how were your boys in this time? What was their experience?
Interestingly, so they are about a year apart, and then my biological son is a year older than each of them. So we had them, they were stair steps. They bonded with my son. They attached to my son for many years before my husband or I. And they did obviously form a close bond. They were in different rooms at the orphanage, so they did not know each other until the day they met their forever family. But one of them was, early on diagnosed with a lot of attachment disorder, reactive attachment disorder, which you probably know is a very questionable diagnosis anymore. And like an oppositional defiant behavior, which is such a terrible label for a kid who's had trauma, and it's not necessarily the right one. The other one had a lot of sensory struggles, more than the attachment. He had a lot of sensory disorder stuff that we were working with, and just very limited resources on that. Yeah. And, so and then they had physical. One of them had Giardia that took almost 2 years to get rid of. I mean, they just had a lot ongoing. And then learning English.
Because how old were they when they came home?
We just under 2 and 3, maybe. But that's not probably accurate.
When you mentioned, Kara, how they did not bond for a while with you and your husband, what did you expect that it would look like bringing them home and the bonding, and what was the reality?
This was in 2009. So that was before Instagram.
Yes.
Facebook was a different beast. It was actually kind of a safe space. I think that we really thought that if we were patient and we had lots and lots of structure, and we established rules, and we were consistent with our rules. Like, I think we thought we can parent them. Like, look at our bio kids. Our bio kids are great kids. We're just going to do the same thing and we'll be fine.
Yeah. How'd that work for you?
Well, that was an epic failure. And that is why I'm so passionate about what I do now. Yeah. And that's why I'm so passionate about changing the language and making the conversation a normal conversation and nothing to be embarrassed or ashamed about.
Yeah. And when you talk about not bonding, did that look like they wouldn't want to hug you? Did that look like they just, what kind of, how did that look?
I think probably a lot of your audience has some insight into what attachment disorders or behaviors look like. So it would look like an inappropriate affections to people they didn't know, but resisting me, pushing me away, physically, like trying to get away from me, yet climbing onto the lap of one of my friends.
Yes.
It would look like a lot of physical. I mean, we had a lot of physical violence for many years in our house. And, we always knew that it was their trauma. It wasn't them. Like there was never a time that I thought I had kids that were just bad kids. And I don't believe there's any such thing as a bad kid, but I never thought that this child really wants to hurt me, or this child really hates me. I, from the beginning, knew that this was because they had never felt safe and they were scared. I did always know that. I just didn't know what to do with it.
Yeah. And explain that. Some of our listeners know this idea of felt safety versus true safety, but explain what that is.
Yeah. So when I usually describe felt safety as like, if your little one is at the top of the slide and they cannot go down that slide until you're standing at the end, you and I both know it's not any safer or more dangerous if you're at the bottom of that slide, but your presence there makes that child feel safe. And if they feel safe, then they have the courage to go down that slide. That's how I explained felt safety. And so for my boys, they were in this constant state of stress and tension and fear, really, because their entire world, everything, their food, their surroundings, their clothing, their language, their water, their health, every single person, every single thing that they knew had been completely changed. And so they never felt, especially our older son never felt, I don't think he ever felt safe unless he was maybe alone with his other brother that was also from Rwanda. And so he was just living in a constant state of working in his lower brain. Like some kids that looks like fight or flight or freeze or fawn, or minute to minute it's changing. And that's kind of how he was. He was constantly in a state of, we use the word dysregulation a lot. He was just in a constant state of dysregulation, of trying to figure out how to feel safe.
That's so hard. And it's so good for us to recognize that that's what's going on inside of them. It's not necessarily that I want to make her mad. I want to do this. It is like a survival. It's a survival.
Yeah. And I think, it's so huge for anybody who works with a child to understand that we are all born with our lower functioning brain, and our lower brain operates in survival. That's what keeps us alive, right? And that's the part of our brains that seeks to feel safe and to seek the survival. And our upper brain is the part of our brain that's growing until the day we die. And our upper brain learns by experiences. And that's how we make those connections. That's how we understand the world around us. That's how we connect the dots. And so when we have a child that doesn't have access to the things to create an upper level brain process, they're only operating in survival. And that's not their fault.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great way to describe that. So we're going to move on a little bit from your journey of adoption, and because you also then became foster parent. So what led to that? What prompted this next journey?
So we, a lot of things. It's kind of, our story is so complex. Rwanda closed international adoptions in a few years after we adopted our boys. And that is when we launched our nonprofit. And that is about that time is when we took a deep dive into TBRI, into trust-based relational interventions. We went to, at the time, they had weekend conferences for parents, and it was sponsored through Show Hope, through Stephen Curtis Chapman's ministry. And we went, and we were just like, we could not get enough of it. Like that, we went for the 2 days, and like that Saturday night, my husband built a zip line, and he hung a tire swing in our backyard, and like all the sensory things. And after that, we just we just read and we found as much as we could. We went to as many trainings and we started seeing a lot of hope. Like it still gets me. Sorry. And we saw our kids' lives transformed. And so we were like, as we were launching our ministry in Rwanda, we were like, this is what all kids need, not just kids in homes, like all kids in schools, kids everywhere. And so we, between 2013 and the time we started officially fostering, we launched Amana Kids. We took in a child that was too old then for foster care, and she lived with us for 3 years. And so we didn't have support because she was older and phased out. And we had her with us, and we had a young man who we gained legal guardianship of, who had initially was going to be an exchange student with us. And then the pandemic happened, and his biological mom basically was like, he's 16, he's yours. So he ended up staying with us. And so having extra teenagers with our 4 kids, and then I know that your listening audience knows how hard it is when they leave. And we're limited into how much support we can give kids when they're out of our care. And it's hard to parent young adults anyway, because developmentally they want to be on their own. They think they know. And then you throw in the complexities of legal guardianship or having a temporary family or whatever their stories were. And the pandemic was happening, and I'm a healthcare provider. And so I was like, we can't take any more kids in unless they're little tiny ones. Like, we can't. And in May of 2020, my husband registered us for foster care classes during the peak of the pandemic before, but he didn't tell me. And I took a phone call, and it was from our county DHS office. And they were like asking me all these questions. And I said, we haven't had a home study since 2000. We haven't had a home study. You have the wrong number. And she said, she went through my name and my husband's name, and she said, no, I don't have the wrong number. And I said, you do have the wrong number. I have not filled out any information. And then I looked over at my husband, and he's like, Happy Mother's Day? And he surprise signed me up as like a Mother's Day gift to have us be fostered. You're going to take care of people dying of COVID. And also we have these extra kids, and we're going to go ahead and start fostering. But I love that about him. Like at the time, I was like, okay, but it's only going to be little ones, knowing that in foster care, and at least in our state, we do everything we can not to separate babies. Right. So we went through all of that, all of the things, with me, like holding this line. We're not taking big kids. We're not, only babies. And the state saying, you're not going to get a baby because we don't have babies. And I'm me saying, yeah, I know, that's the plan. And then, and then a few months later, when we were done officially again with all of our licensing and whatnot, they called on a Friday afternoon and said, can you take a baby? And I said, of course. And then they said, great, we'll be there in 20 minutes. And so that is how we got our baby bird. And we tried for, she was our foster girl for a good 2+ years. We tried working with Bio Mom for almost 2.5 years before rights were terminated. That was our first placement, and she's our last adoption. And then we've had some other ones in between there.
Okay. And you called her as her little sweet nickname, your baby bird or Birdie. Is that right?
Yeah. She's our baby bird. Yeah.
I like that. So, I remember reading one of your blog posts where you talked about this grief that you felt for her first mom, and kind of a realization there. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So, my job that I went to college for and grad school for is that I'm a women's health nurse practitioner and a midwife. So I have been delivering babies and been on the other side on the with moms who had a lot of trauma and loss for 16 years. And so this was the first time, I rejoice in my birdie. She's full of joy and life and delight. And I still get very sad for her biological mom, that her biological mom will never know what a gift she is. I get sad that her biological mom didn't have the right people in her life to love her well and to help her overcome. I get sad because I know my other kids wish that they could know their biological moms and know their biological family stories, and they can't. And I know that Birdie, her story is in some ways even more painful than my boys, because her biological mom, we know her and we can tell her we all tried. She had all the things that we could do, that the system could do, that the courts could do. She had all the resources, and in many ways, that's a harder story than one from a country that has had a genocide and poverty and lack of resources. And so I still grieve a lot that woman is missing out on Birdie. And I know that whether she recognizes it right now or not, there'll just always be a little hole in both of their hearts. So, I've always been for women. I've always been for moms. And our intent with foster care is reunification. Our intent is to keep families together. But the reality is sometimes families have to be broken apart to be able to heal, because it's a cycle, right? And we learn how to love, we learn how to care for one another through our families. So I still grieve for her. And I know that my baby bird will grieve for her in the future.
Yeah, and I think that it will mean something very special to your little one, knowing how much you care about her mom as well.
Yeah. And it's really cool that she has big brothers to support her that can help her in ways that her dad and I can't.
Right. Yeah.
It's a huge gift.
Absolutely. It is a gift. I feel that deeply. I also, our children have come to our family through birth, through adoption, and through foster care as well. And it is very special. There have been times when one of my kids was grieving, and I was able to, bring another kid to come alongside them and say, hey, I know you've struggled with this in the past. Would you mind sharing with them, and in ways that, I'm not equipped to do. And because I haven't experienced adoption in my personal life, I haven't experienced some of that.
And isn't that amazing how sovereign God is? Like that he writes these kids' stories.
Right. Yeah. And how so many people say, oh, those kids are so lucky to have you, and oh, what would there have been? And we know as parents, like it goes both ways. Yes, sure, I am grateful, and they are grateful. They're thankful in the sense of they're thankful to have parents who love them. But it came at a cost.
Right.
And they have taught me so much. I have been changed completely because of them in my life.
And it's like such a deep love that our Father has for us.
Yeah.
To be able to give us each other.
Yes. Right. Yeah.
For sure.
I have a son who is, he's 16 now. In fact, he was on the podcast with me before he shared some of his story. And he just has a very tender heart. And he is the kid that if I come up to him and say, hey, something hard happened today, he is right there, arm around me. How you doing, Mom? How you doing? You know, I mean, I'm just like, the times that I have cried on his shoulder, he's supposed to be the kid. He is the kid, you know, but there have been times he has brought me such comfort. What a gift is that, you know,
that's my 16-year-old too. And I would have never been able to, guess that is where our story would go.
Yes. Wow. That's beautiful.
It's amazing.
That's beautiful.
And I think the relationship he and I have now is really a testimony in our community, because our community knows our family, my husband being in the public schools, us having a lot of kids in the high school.
Yep.
They know, like, even when he was little, they've seen kind of on the outside, they've seen our story and they saw the hard stuff. And now they see this like 180 and honestly, like, redemption. They've seen redemption, and what a testimony it is.
Yes.
It couldn't have been written better.
Right. That's awesome. Yeah. And I hear the passion in you. I see the tenderness, in your tears, and, you so deeply want those of us who say yes to be equipped, because it is walking with kids who have gone through such trauma, especially if we haven't, you know, we don't know what it's like to not feel safe. We don't know what it's like to not have had our primary needs met. And so, you know, maybe even backing up a little bit, are there things that you're like, everybody needs to understand this about trauma? What would that be?
It is so nuanced, and we cannot describe it. We cannot understand someone else's trauma, just like we cannot understand how someone experiences pain, because it's so impacted by other experiences, by the world around us, by our own resources, our own support systems or lack of support systems. And so I think it's real easy if you're an outsider I'm sure you've heard this, people will say, oh, well, you got her as a baby, or, oh, we're fine because I adopted him at birth. Or we make these excuses, but we forget, or we don't know that children and babies, they start to experience the good and the bad around them, even in utero. And there are so many countless studies that support that babies are impacted by what their moms are experiencing, by the stress that their moms are under, by high-risk pregnancies, by complicated births, by chronic illnesses, by hospitalizations, by caregivers that are inconsistent or unwell. So we see even kids experience trauma if their moms and dads aren't emotionally healthy, or if they're jumping from one parent to another parent between households. We can't assume that trauma is only for kids in foster care, or only for kids who have had a parent die or have been in an orphanage. It's just like pain. We cannot describe anyone else's trauma. I think that is where a lot of people don't give kids the grace that they deserve.
Especially in a circumstance where maybe they're like, I went through this and I dealt with it like this, so you do fine. Too. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
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 When I work with families, I'm always surprised at the light bulb moments that they have, you know, when they're like, oh my gosh. And it's such a relief to know, like, yeah, your child had something hard happen to them. It's not you. Yeah. It's not about you. It's about this hard thing that they're trying to process.
Yes.
It's not you. Yes. That's such a relief. And it's such a, like I said, I call them light bulb moments, like, oh yeah, that makes sense.
Right. And it gives you grace, for them, because when we're living out of a place of they're out to get me, then we go into a little bit of a survival mode, and we want to fight back and be in control. And that is like the exact opposite of what is helpful for all of us.
And that tension, when you've got that tension, nothing good can come of it. Nothing.
Right. Yes. What, as far as, and this kind of just flows into this, what do we then need to know about connection?
So that's like one of my favorite places to be. Connection is where, when we're connected with our child, that's where the healing can happen. That's like that sweet spot when our child feels like they see me, they like me, they want to be with me. I'm safe right now. And for a child who has not grown up with that felt safety, like we talked about, if the child has not ever been able to build a relationship built on trust, then connecting is our goal. Because they're not going to be able to move forward. They're not going to be able to find healing if they don't feel safe, if they don't feel like the adult that's with them is beside them and for them and on their side.
Wow. And so sometimes from an outside perspective, might it look like permissive parenting?
Absolutely. And when I teach in my classes, I will frequently say, this is not free range parenting. This is finding the balance of structure and nurture. And this is freeing you to love your kid like Jesus. Because I don't know about but I never learned of a Jesus that sent a child away, that shamed a child, that hit a child, that made the child feel embarrassed or unworthy or not good enough. That is not the Jesus that I have loved or learned about. And when you can let go of all your expectations, and when you can let go of that traditional rules and respect, that's such a big thing, then you can find that space to have more compassion and more grace and more patience and more nurturing, and see your child the way God sees them.
And it's when you're in that place, that's when you can have these conversations and start talking about where
and that's when your child can hear you. When your child's guard is down and when you're connected with them, when they feel safe, when they feel like, okay, mom's for me, mom's on my side, that's when they can start to hear you say, hey, next time when this happens, let's try doing it this way. That's when you can start coming in with the structure that they need. But you can't bring in that structure if they don't feel safe, if they can't connect with you. It's not going to work. You might get a Band-Aid fix. You might get a kid to follow some rules for a short period of time. But what happens when the stress changes? What happens when their stress window narrows because of other things going on around them? That's not what we want for our kids. We want our kids to be able to enter the world and to be able to cope with the things that come at them, and to be able to recover from those stresses and not to be disabled by them.
That's good. And a lot of times I know in my parenting, also taking time, especially with teenagers. Most of my children are teenagers at this moment. And so I am learning. I wouldn't say I have learned completely. I am learning that when I want to lash out or, bark orders or control, I can get to crazy mom mode really fast.
Oh yeah.
And what God continues to remind me of is like, take a minute, take a day, take a couple of days sometimes to pray for your child, to remember that you love them, that you're not just angry and want to control them, because I've tried the control method. It doesn't work. It doesn't yield the fruit. It creates distance. It is harmful. It is just not, it doesn't work.
No, and it doesn't feel good.
It doesn't feel good to anybody.
No.
And what has been so incredible is to watch God answer prayers for my kids. When I pray, and I can pray some really bold prayers, Lord, make them miserable until they see their sin or until they confess, Lord, work in their heart, do what you need to do. And Lord, help me to know shape me. Exactly. Help me to release control, because maybe what I think they need is not actually what they need. Maybe I'm needing something.
Right.
So that has been a changing.
Bringing your community alongside you, because I work with parents sometimes, especially moms, because moms get the brunt of the hard behavior. Be accountable, share what it's actually like, because if you're putting up a front, if you're putting on an Instagram filter, then you've got shame there, and there's nothing good ever comes from shame. And if you can be accountable and authentic with somebody that you trust, they can be praying with you. And saying, help me love my kid like Jesus.
Yes.
Help me not be angry. There is no fruit of that. Righteous is not righteous anger. The only anger I should have is righteousness, is over righteous, right? Of the injustices of the world. And what my child has experienced is injustice. So if I'm going to have anger, it needs to be at the system that failed him, or the things that hurt him, or the sin of the world, but not my son.
Yeah, that's good. As we kind of start to head towards the end here, what are some practical skills? Are there some? We talked briefly, even in prayer and accountability, those are good. But are there any other practical skills that come to mind that are go-to?
All of our kids need nurturing. And when we meet their needs, we're nurturing them. When we meet even their physical needs, that's providing nourishment, that's providing nurturing to them. And when they're being nurtured, that's going to start building up their trust. And so even just this simple fact of when you see a hard behavior, that you're seeing it as a communication tool and being curious about it. What's actually going on under the surface with my kid? Is he hungry? Has it been 4 hours and he just needs a snack and he's like a Snickers commercial?
Yes.
Or is he thirsty? Or did he not sleep last night? Was he up not worrying? Or is he embarrassed? Did something happen with his friends and he's embarrassed? Or is this environment we're in too overwhelming right now? Or does he just need to get up and move and play and take a break? And so being curious about behaviors what are they actually trying to tell me? What is that unmet need? And how can I meet that need? I think that's one. The other one I would say is not to try to talk all the time. If your child's having a hard time and they're having a moment, that's the time for you to be quiet and be present and available, but no talking, no lecturing, no teachable. The teaching cannot happen in the moment. It needs to happen when you're back to a spot where you're connected again. Maybe it's going to happen a day later after you've prayed, or maybe it's going to happen 10 minutes later when that child's had a snack and they're not mad anymore. But talking and lecturing and teaching in the moment isn't going to work. And I am guilty of that all the time.
It's an easy one.
Working on that. I'm always working on it. Those are a couple of the ones I always say, and looking at that behavior as a communication tool. They're having a hard time. They're not giving you a hard time.
Yes. And what I'm hearing from that is you're getting really curious.
And when you're curious, you're less angry.
Yeah. That's good.
And I can't say enough for families to find every bit of resources they can about TBRI, whether it's on YouTube, whether it's finding a local conference, whether it's finding on social media the families that are sharing and teaching, whatever it is, it's a game changer. I'm sure that you know that.
Yeah. And it you can connect with it. You can say, oh, that makes sense.
Oh, that's not just my family. When we started teaching our staff in Rwanda, it was cute because they were like, what? This doesn't just happen to Rwandan kids? American kids do this?
Interesting.
Yes, this is worldwide. This is all human beings.
This is a human experience. Yes.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, Kara, I've really enjoyed our conversation. I appreciate your heart for these kids, for your kids, for our nation's kids, for our parents. I would love as we close here, I am thinking of the listener who has cried tears with you. And maybe those tears are because they're feeling really hopeless and they're hearing your story and going, okay, I know what she was talking about. I have not yet experienced some of the wins that they have experienced now. And I am I just need to give up. Will you please encourage this listener today?
Oh gosh, without crying, like, yeah, I can. God does not mess up. He does not make mistakes. And if you feel like you can't parent this child, you're wrong, because God called you to him, to this boy or girl. This is the child God has called you to in this season, and he never ever messes up. That's what you have to hold on to. And that's what reminds you that there's this big story and you're only seeing a little tiny, you're just in one chapter right now. But he's already written this huge story, and he wants redemption for you, and he wants redemption for your child. And he loves your child as much as he loves you. And he put the two of you together. And the two of you are it's you and your child against their history and their hurts. And God is big enough to take all that away. He is big enough to bring nothing but delight and joy.
Amen. 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 Kara, thank you so much. Well, I hope that today's episode encouraged you wherever you are on your foster care journey. We want you to stay connected, so be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you will never miss an episode. Also, we have great content at theforgotteninitiative.org. Thank you for watching. I cannot wait to be with you next time.